Elsewhere in the ACC, I thought it was a really strong week. Not that the conference had challenges outside the conference, but they didn't have any letdowns. So Syracuse could have lost to Central Michigan. They were roughly a touchdown favorite. We talked about Old Dominion possibly being a challenge for North Carolina, and the Tar Heels blow them out by 30 points. Your thoughts about the ACC in general in week 3?
Pittsburgh was pretty disappointing. Now, we didn't expect Pittsburgh to put up much of a fight against Oklahoma State, but I think Mason Rudolph was even better than a lot of people expected him to be in that game. Oklahoma State really cruised through the first, quarter and a half, 2 quarters, and then that was really it. Pittsburgh turned to Ben DiNucci at quarterback because Max Brown wasn't getting the job done. That'll tell you something. It was a tough game offensively for Pittsburgh, even worse defensively. This Pat Narduzzi defense that everybody wanted to hype up when he came from Michigan State still hasn't been any good for now 2 going on 3 years. So we're still waiting for that. Really disappointing for Pittsburgh if you're a Pittsburgh fan. I think they've looked even worse than a lot of people expected them to when you consider that they almost lost to Youngstown State in week 1, had to go to overtime against a team that was in the FCS National Championship last year. But, you're a team in a power conference and, you're struggling with Youngstown State. You have major issues, and that's what Pittsburgh has at this point. Really surprised at, how much trouble they've had with the transition on offense. Matt Canada, of course, left and went to LSU, and LSU is struggling offensively as well. So that's kind of ironic that Pittsburgh is also struggling offensively without Matt Canada. They're having a lot of trouble putting points on the board. The offense looks like, a poor man's version of the Matt Canada offense from last year, which is a problem. So they're having a lot of issues there at Pittsburgh, and that was problematic. They got blown out the way they did. It was wholly non-competitive from the kickoff, and I expected Pittsburgh to lose that game and lose by a lot, but I was not expecting them to just roll over like they did in that game. I mean, that was never competitive yesterday, and that's really disappointing if you're a Pittsburgh fan. With a team like Oklahoma State coming to town, you hope that the team would have been a little bit more prepared, but maybe the talent gap might just be that strong between Oklahoma State and Pittsburgh. I thought Virginia looked really good against a UConn team that's really, really bad. You were hoping that you would see Virginia really handle a team that is, they're playing like a 50-50 type game against. Now, I understand Virginia was a 10.5 point favorite yesterday, but, Connecticut is one of those teams that, has hung around in recent years in these games against Virginia, and they've even beaten Virginia in the past. So seeing Virginia perform the way they did yesterday and beat a team that they're much better than is really promising there for Bronco Mendenhall. I don't want to put too much stock into it because it is just Connecticut. But I think for the Virginia football program, you have to be happy with the way year 2 is going so far. Virginia is now 2-1. They're over 500 for the first time in Bronco Mendenhall's tenure there. And they've looked more competitive. They looked competitive last weekend against Indiana. They looked good in week 1 against William & Mary, and they looked really, really good yesterday against UConn. So Kurt Benkert's been even better than I expected him to be, which, is saying something because, nobody was expecting Benkert to be all that good. But Benkert's been fantastic this year so far. He's moving the football and getting the chains moving for Virginia, and that's really good for them. NC State took care of business against Furman. Not a lot to complain about there. I thought NC State looked good. They got off to another slow start. I believe it was only 7-3 with like 2 minutes to go in the first quarter, but they really turned on the Jets and blew by Furman the way they should have. I thought it was NC State's best performance of the season yesterday, top to bottom, but take it with a grain of salt because it is Furman. Duke beats Baylor by 14. That's a big deal to me because I knew Baylor was coming to town. They were hungry. They were desperate. Baylor took the early lead on Duke. Duke wasn't phased. Daniel Jones looked really good again. Another really good start for him, and that's 3 games in a row now that he's had really, really good games, and he's a good quarterback and one of the best in the conference, might be second best in the conference right now behind Lamar Jackson, although Kelly Bryant might be giving him a run for his money after that game last night against Louisville. The one other game I do want to talk about is North Carolina and Old Dominion. I thought this was kind of a trap game for North Carolina because North Carolina was, really in a spot where they were 0-2. They needed a victory on the road at Old Dominion, a really weird time at the kickoff, and you're going on the road to Old Dominion. Hard to get really hyped up, but North Carolina hangs 53 on them and beats them handily, which I thought was really important considering, North Carolina didn't get off to the greatest of starts this season and a clear rebuild year for Larry Fedora and his team. But North Carolina looked really good, won a game they really needed yesterday, and I thought that was important. And then Wake Forest, they're 3-0, 46-10 over Utah State. Not a lot to really glean from this performance, except Utah State never really had a prayer. I thought Utah State would perform a little bit better, and I'd use most of that logic off of what happened in week 1 against Wisconsin, when Utah State really hung around with Wisconsin a good bit in that game. Wisconsin ended up pulling away, but I was like, I came away from that game thinking, Utah State's a really decent football program, considering, the conference in which they play in. They don't have the best talent in the world, but they seemed like they were really well coached. But yesterday, Wake Forest was just the better football team. They hit them right in the mouth from the jump, and I thought that was really important for Wake Forest to get that win and look convincing doing it, and that's what they did. And then really quickly, Syracuse looked great against Central Michigan, a game that was a lot less competitive than I expected. Really disappointing for Syracuse, though, is that Middle Tennessee lost yesterday, which it's like, okay, well, you can't beat Middle Tennessee at home last weekend. Middle Tennessee loses to an inferior opponent yesterday, and you blow the doors off of Central Michigan. It really just underscores the fact that Syracuse just came out flat last weekend against a team in Middle Tennessee State that they really should have beaten. So Syracuse moves to 2-1. They looked better. Dino Babers has to be thrilled with how the team bounced back from a tough performance last weekend. But I thought overall, a lot of the ACC teams, like you alluded to, won the games that they should have yesterday. There were no real embarrassing losses, and for the most part, the teams that were clearly superior performed as such.